Get out of my house. Those were the first words my father-in-law spoke to me after we buried my husband, was still in my funeral dress, still holding the folded flag they'd given me, still tasting the salt of tears I'd cried over the man I'd loved for 8 years. The cemetery dirt was still under my fingernails from when I'd thrown that handful of earth onto his casket, and Richard Morrison, the man whose son had just died serving our country, looked me in the eye and said, "Pack your things. You have until Sunday." He forgot one thing. His son was smarter than both of us. My name is Jordan. I'm 29. And I learned that day that grief makes some people cruel, but it makes others calculated. The funeral had been perfect in that terrible way funerals are when someone dies too young. Military honors for my husband Michael, who'd been killed by an IED in Afghanistan 3 weeks earlier. The flag ceremony. The 21-gun salute. The way everyone kept saying he died a hero, like that would somehow make the empty bed easier to sleep in. Richard had played the grieving father beautifully, accepting condolences with that firm handshake and stoic nod, speaking about his boy with tears in his eyes. I'd watched him work the crowd, basking in the sympathy, collecting the attention like he was the one who'd lost the most. His wife Patricia had died 2 years earlier. Michael was their only child. In Richard's mind, that made him the primary mourner, the central figure in this tragedy. I was just the supporting character, the woman his son had married despite his disapproval. During the service, I'd caught him staring at me with something that wasn't grief. It was calculation. Like he was already planning something while the pastor talked about resurrection and eternal rest. When we got back to the house Michael and I had been living in for 3 years, the house where I'd gotten the phone call that destroyed my world, Richard had pulled me aside. "We need to discuss your situation." "My situation?" "Your living arrangements. This house belongs to the Morrison family. Always has." I'd stared at him, trying to process his words through the fog of exhaustion and Xanax the doctor had prescribed. "Richard, can we please not do this today? When else would we do it? You're young. You'll remarry. Start over somewhere else." His voice was matter-of-fact, almost kind. Like he was being reasonable. "This house has been in our family for 60 years. It needs to stay that way." The guests were still in the front yard, still talking in those hushed funeral voices, still holding paper plates with ham sandwiches and potato salad. My husband's body was barely cold in the ground. "I live here," I'd said quietly. "You lived here with my son. My son is gone." The casual cruelty of it had stolen my breath. But I'd just nodded and walked away, retreating to the bedroom I'd shared with Michael, where his uniform still hung in the closet and his coffee mug still sat on the nightstand. Assumed we'd work something out. That grief was making him harsh, but we'd find a way to coexist. Michael had always said his father's bark was worse than his bite. I was wrong. "Get out of my house." He'd said it with such finality, such contempt, that I'd actually stepped backward. Like his words had physical weight. "Richard, please. We're both grieving. Let's not." "I'm not grieving with you. I'm grieving my son." "You're grieving the gravy train that just ended." The accusation hit like a slap. "How dare you?" "How dare I what? Tell the truth? You think I don't know what this was about? Small-town girl marries the boy with the family money? Classic story." My hands were shaking. "I loved him." "I'm sure you did. Love and money aren't mutually exclusive." He'd smiled then, cold and satisfied. "But the money wasn't his to promise you. This house, the land, the investments, they're all family trusts. Morrison family trusts. You're not a Morrison anymore. My name is still, your name is whatever you want it to be. Just not in my house." That night, I'd sat on the bed Michael and I had shared and tried to understand how my world had collapsed twice in 3 weeks. First, the knock on the door from the casualty notification officer. Now this, I'd called my sister in Portland, sobbing into the phone about Richard's ultimatum. Can he do that? She'd asked. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. I'd wiped my nose on one of Michael's t-shirts. He's right about one thing, I never paid attention to the legal stuff. Michael handled all that. What are you going to do? I'd looked around the room at all the pieces of the life we'd built together. Photos from our honeymoon in Ireland. The bookshelf Michael had built for my birthday. The rocking chair where I'd planned to nurse our children someday. I guess I'll pack. Asterisk, I started packing the next morning, moving through the house like a ghost. Everything reminded me of Michael. The kitchen where he'd made me breakfast on Sundays. The living room where we'd watched movies and argued about politics. The garage where he'd restored a 1967 Mustang that would never be finished now. Richard was everywhere, hovering, making sure I only took things that were clearly mine. He'd already changed the locks on the garage and the basement. Family heirlooms, he explained. I'm sure you understand. I didn't understand anything anymore. While packing Michael's desk, I found something that stopped me cold. A manila envelope with my name written in his handwriting, tucked behind a stack of military manuals. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before his deployment. Jordan, if you're reading this, something happened to me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't come home to you. I'm sorry I left you alone with my father, who I know doesn't appreciate you the way he should. There are things I never told you about our finances. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I wanted to protect you from my father's attempts to control everything he thinks belongs to him. Call David Chen immediately. He's our attorney, and he has documents you need to see. Don't let my father pressure you into anything before you talk to David. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Don't let anyone make you feel small. All my love, Michael P.S. The blue folder in the safe has copies of everything. Combination is your birthday. My hands were trembling as I folded the letter. There was a safe. In 3 years of living in this house, I'd never seen a safe. I waited until Richard left for his weekly poker game, then searched the house systematically. Found it behind a false panel in the master bedroom closet, a small fireproof safe I'd somehow never noticed. The combination worked on the first try. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Deeds. Insurance policies. Investment statements. And a will dated just before Michael's deployment to a will that left everything to me, not just his personal possessions. Everything. The house, the land, the investments Richard claimed were in family trusts. According to these documents, Michael had inherited everything when his mother died, then immediately restructured it all to protect it from his father's interference. The family trusts Richard kept mentioning? They'd been dissolved 2 years ago. There was a note in Michael's handwriting clipped to the will. Dad never knew I did this. Figured it was better to ask forgiveness than permission. Take care of yourself, babe. You earned this. I sat on the closet floor for 20 minutes, reading and rereading documents I didn't fully understand, but that seemed to change everything. Then I called David Chen. Jordan. I've been expecting your call. I'm so sorry for your loss. David, I found Michael's letter. And the documents. Good. We need to meet immediately. How much has Richard told you about the estate? He says I have to move out. That everything belongs to family trusts. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Jordan, Richard is either lying or completely deluded. You own that house. You own everything. Michael made sure of that. But he said, it doesn't matter what he said. I have the legal documents. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? After we hung up, I looked around the bedroom, my bedroom, with new eyes. The family photos Richard had been subtly removing from common areas. The furniture he'd been measuring. The way he'd been going through Michael's things like he was. Inventory. He wasn't just grieving. He was planning to erase me entirely. That evening, when he came home from poker, I was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. "I thought you'd be packing," he said. "I am packing. Slowly. Well, pick up the pace. Sunday is 2 days away." I took a sip of wine and looked at him over the rim of the glass. "Richard, can I ask you something?" "What?" "Why do you hate me so much?" He sat down across from me, suddenly looking older than his 68 years. "I don't hate you, Jordan. But you were never right for my son." "Because I'm not rich?" "Because you're not strong enough for this family. The Morrison name means something in this town. Has meant something for 3 generations. You're soft." I nodded like I was considering his words. "You might be right." The agreement seemed to surprise him. "I usually am. Michael was strong enough for both of us, wasn't he? My boy was a Morrison through and through. Smart too. Brilliant. Could have done anything he wanted with his life." I finished my wine and stood up. "Well, I'll try to be out by Sunday. As you said, I'm not strong enough for this family anyway." That night, I slept better than I had since Michael died. David Chen's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the intimidating law firm atmosphere I'd imagined, it was warm and cluttered, with family photos covering every surface and a coffee pot that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Coffee? It's terrible, but it's strong. I'll take terrible and strong." He poured 2 cups and settled behind his desk with a thick file folder. "Jordan, I've been Michael's attorney since he turned 18. I watched him grow from a stubborn teenager who wanted to prove his independence from his father into a man who understood exactly what his father was capable of." "What do you mean?" "Richard Morrison is a bully. Always has been. He bullied his wife, tried to bully his son, and now he's trying to bully you. Michael knew this day would come." David opened the folder and spread documents across his desk like he was dealing cards. "Let me explain what actually happened to the Morrison family assets." For the next hour, he walked me through a legal maze I'd never known existed. When Patricia Morrison died, she'd left everything to Michael, bypassing Richard entirely. The family trusts Richard kept invoking? Patricia had dissolved them years earlier, apparently after some kind of fight with her husband. She never told Richard, David explained. Let him think the trusts were still in place. Michael continued the charade after her death. Why? Because he knew his father would contest everything if he found out. This way, Richard assumed the assets were protected from interference. He never imagined his son would inherit outright and then have the power to restructure everything. So when Michael left everything to me, he was leaving you assets worth approximately $2.3 million. The house, the surrounding 40 acres, Patricia's life insurance, Michael's military benefits, and a substantial investment portfolio. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had no idea. Michael didn't want you to worry about money while he was deployed. He wanted you to focus on your art, your writing, building the life you'd planned together. David's expression grew grim. He also knew his father would try exactly what he's trying now. Richard thinks I'm some kind of gold digger. Richard thinks everyone is trying to take what he believes belongs to him. The irony is that legally, he has no claim to any of it. Patricia made sure of that. David pulled out another document. This is my favorite part. Michael added a codicil to his will 6 months ago. If anyone contests the will or attempts to pressure you into giving up your inheritance, their own inheritance from the estate, which was going to be Michael's personal effects and a small monetary gift, gets donated to veterans' charities. Instead, he knew his father would do this. He knew his father better than anyone. I stared at the documents spread across the desk, trying to process the magnitude of what Michael had done. He'd protected me from a fight I didn't even know was coming. David, what happens now? Now you go home and pack Richard's belongings. What? Jordan, you own that house. Richard is a guest who's overstayed his welcome. You have every right to ask him to leave. But he's family. Michael wanted you protected. That's why he did all this. David leaned forward. I've known Richard for 20 years. He respects one thing, power. Right now, he thinks he has it and you don't. Time to correct that misconception. I don't know if I can. I'm not good at confrontation. You don't have to confront anyone. That's what lawyers are for. David handed me a business card. This is my nephew, Marcus. He's a locksmith. Call him today. Have him change the locks and install a security system. Then call me when Richard comes home. You want me to lock him out? I want you to take possession of your property. There's a difference. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Not happiness, I was still too raw with grief for that. But purpose. Direction, Michael had planned for this. He'd seen his father's cruelty coming and built a shield around me that I'd never known existed. I pulled into the driveway of my house, and looked at it with new eyes. The wraparound porch Patricia had designed. The garden where Michael had proposed. The workshop where Richard had been sorting through Michael's tools like they were his inheritance. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard, how's the packing going? Don't forget to leave the house keys on the kitchen counter. I deleted the message without responding. Then I called Marcus Chin. Marcus Chin arrived at 3 o'clock with a van full of equipment and his uncle's no-nonsense attitude. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with calloused hands and kind eyes. Uncle David explained the situation, he said, shaking my hand. I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry you're dealing with this garbage on top of everything else. Thank you. So here's what we're going to do. New locks on every exterior door, including the garage. Security cameras at all entrances. Motion sensors. The works. He paused. How long before the other party comes home? Richard usually gets back from his weekly errands around 6. Perfect. We'll be done by 5:30. Marcus worked with quiet efficiency, installing locks, mounting cameras, testing systems. I watched from the kitchen window, feeling like I was in someone else's life. 3 days ago, I'd been a widow being evicted from her home. Now I was, what? A property owner evicting her father-in-law. The transformation felt surreal. While Marcus worked, I did something that felt equally strange. I packed Richard's belongings. Not vindicatively, not carelessly, but methodically. His clothes, his medications, his books. The photo albums he'd been hoarding. The family papers he'd claimed were too important for me to see. Found things that made my stomach turn. A folder labeled Jordan Financial Investigation containing printouts of my credit report, my bank statements, background check results. He'd been researching me like I was a criminal. Another folder contained real estate listings. He'd already been shopping for buyers, planning to sell the house the moment he got me out of IT. In his bedside drawer, I found something that made my hands shake, a draft of a letter to Michael's commanding officer, dated a week after the funeral. Richard had been trying to claim Michael's death benefits, arguing that as the surviving parent, he was the rightful beneficiary. He'd been planning this from the beginning. While I'd been grieving, he'd been scheming. At 5:15, Marcus finished installing the last camera. Systems live, he announced, showing me how to monitor everything from an app on my phone. You've got full coverage. Motion detection, night vision, cloud storage. If a mouse farts in your driveway, you'll know about it. Despite everything, I laughed. Thank you. You need anything else, and I mean anything, you call me directly. He handed me his card. Uncle David's told me about Richard Morrison. Guys. Been a problem in this town for years. What do you mean? Let's just say you're not the first person he's tried to intimidate. Difference is, you've got Uncle David in your corner, and you've got the law on your side. After Marcus left, I walked through the house one more time. Richard's belongings were packed neatly by the front door. The new locks gleamed on every entrance. The security cameras blinked their red recording lights. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt safe in my own home. At exactly 6:03, Richard's truck pulled into the driveway. I watched through the security app as he approached the front door, fumbled with his keys, then rattled the handle when they didn't work. He knocked. Jordan? What's wrong with the lock? I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Nothing's wrong with it. It's new. His face went through several expressions: confusion, irritation, then dawning realization. What the hell do you think you're doing? Richard, I need you to leave. Leave? This is my house. No, it's not. I held up the deed, the will, the trust dissolution documents. It's my house. It's been my house for 2 years. Michael made sure of that. He stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible. Your belongings are packed. You can pick them up now, or I can have them delivered wherever you're staying. I'm not staying anywhere. I live here. Not anymore. Richard's face was turning an alarming shade of red. You can't do this to me. I'm family. Family doesn't try to steal from each other while the body's still warm. Steal? I'm not stealing anything. This house belongs to the Morrison family. It belongs to me. I am family, Richard. Or I was, until you decided I wasn't worthy of basic human decency. He pushed past me into the house, heading for the stairs. I'm not going anywhere until I see these supposed documents verified by a real lawyer. I pulled out my phone. David? He's here. Yes, he's refusing to leave. Okay. I hung up and looked at Richard, who was standing in the middle of what used to be his living room, looking lost and furious. David Chen will be here in 10 minutes. He's bringing the sheriff. The sheriff? This is my property, Richard. You're trespassing. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard Morrison looked uncertain. David Chen arrived with Sheriff Martinez and an attitude I'd never seen from him before. Gone was the grandfatherly coffee and comfort approach. This David was all business, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that could cut glass. Richard had spent the 10 minutes between my phone call and their arrival pacing the living room like a caged animal, muttering about ungrateful wives and family loyalty and lawyers who didn't understand tradition. When David walked through the door, Richard practically lunged at him. David. Thank God you're here. You need to explain to this girl that she can't just steal my house and throw me out on the street. David set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with deliberate precision. Richard, I need you to sit down and be quiet. Don't you dare talk to me like, sit down. The authority in David's voice was startling. Richard actually obeyed, sinking into his recliner with wounded dignity. Sheriff Martinez positioned himself by the door, notebook in hand. Mr. Chen, you want to explain the situation here? Certainly. Richard Morrison is currently trespassing on property owned by Jordan Morrison, the widow of his son Michael. She has asked him to leave. He has refused. That's ridiculous. Richard exploded. This house has been in my family for 60 years. David pulled out a thick stack of documents. Richard, when did you last see the deed to this property? I don't need to see the deed. I know what it says. When, Richard? It's been a while. Patricia handled all that paperwork. Patricia died 2 years ago. Did you review any estate documents after her death? Richard's certainty wavered slightly. Michael said everything was in order. The family trusts, the inheritance structure. He said nothing had changed. Michael lied to you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard stared at David as if he'd spoken in tongues. That's impossible. My son wouldn't, he was a Morrison. We don't lie to family. Your son was protecting his wife from you. David spread the documents across the coffee table. Patricia dissolved all the family trusts in 2019, 2 years before she died. She left everything directly to Michael, bypassing you entirely. Why would she do that? David's expression suggested he knew exactly why but wasn't going to say it. In front of the sheriff. She had her reasons. The point is, when Michael inherited, he immediately restructured everything to ensure Jordan would be protected if something happened to him. Protected from what? From this, Richard. From exactly what you're doing right now. Sheriff Martinez cleared his throat. So Mrs. Morrison owns the property? Completely and outright. House, land, all contents, all financial assets. Richard has no legal claim to any of it. Richard looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. But I'm his father. I'm family. You're also the man who told his grieving daughter-in-law to get out of her house 3 days after she buried her husband. David's voice was ice cold. Family doesn't do that, Richard. I was protecting the Morrison legacy. You were protecting your own interests. Just like you've been doing since Patricia died. David pulled out another document. This is particularly interesting. A letter you wrote to Michael's commanding officer, attempting to claim death benefits that legally belong to Jordan. You wrote it a week after the funeral. The color drained from Richard's face. How did you left it in your desk drawer. In Jordan's house. Which she had every right to search while packing your belongings. Sheriff Martinez stepped forward. Sir, you need to gather your things and leave the premises. If you refuse, I'll have to place you under arrest for trespassing. Richard looked around the room wildly, like he was searching for allies who weren't there. This is insane. You can't just throw me out of my own home. It's not your home. I said quietly. It never was your home. It was Michael's home. Now it's my home. You're making a mistake, Jordan. You don't understand what this house means, what this family means. You're just some small-town girl who got lucky. David stood up. Richard, I'm going to give you some free legal advice. Stop talking. Every word you say right now could be used against you in the harassment lawsuit Jordan would be well within her rights to file. Harassment lawsuit? Threatening a widow, attempting to defraud her of her inheritance, trying to steal federal death benefits. Should I continue? Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Sheriff Martinez checked his watch. Sir, you have 5 minutes to collect your belongings and leave voluntarily. After that, I'm placing you under arrest. Richard looked at me one last time, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before: defeat. You think you've won something here? I think I've protected what my husband left me. What he wanted me to have. Michael would be ashamed of. What you're doing to his family. I met his gaze steadily. Michael would be ashamed of what you tried to do to his wife. Richard gathered his boxes and bags with the mechanical movements of a man in shock. At the door, he turned back one more time. This isn't over. David stepped forward. Actually, Richard, it is. And if you attempt any further contact with Jordan, any further harassment, any legal challenges to the will, or any other interference with her life, I will pursue every legal remedy available. Are we clear? Richard didn't answer. He loaded his belongings into his truck and drove away without looking back. The house felt different immediately. Lighter. Like it had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. After Richard left, Sheriff Martinez lingered for a few more minutes, taking notes and ensuring everything was properly documented. When he finally departed, it was just David and me in the suddenly enormous house. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling back into his gentle, grandfatherly demeanor. I sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake. That I don't actually have the right to throw my father-in-law out of his house. Jordan, this stopped being his house the day Patricia died. He just never knew it. Why didn't she tell him? David was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Patricia came to see me about 6 months before she died. She was concerned about Richard's behavior. His gambling, his drinking, his treatment of Michael and you. His gambling? You didn't know? Richard's had a poker problem for years. Patricia had been covering his debts, bailing him out, protecting the family assets from his creditors. She was terrified that if he inherited everything, he'd gamble it all away within a year. The revelation hit me like a slap. The weekly poker games aren't just friendly games with the boys, no. Richard owes money to some very unpleasant people. Patricia restructured everything to keep the assets safe from his creditors. I thought about all the times Richard had criticized my spending, questioned whether I was worthy of the Morrison name, implied that I was somehow mercenary or opportunistic. He's been in debt this whole time? Substantial debt. Patricia's life insurance paid off most of it, but there are still outstanding obligations. About $40,000 worth. Is that why he wanted me out? So he could sell the house? Almost certainly. This property is worth about $600,000. More than enough to clear his debts and give him a fresh start somewhere else. I looked around the living room, seeing it with new eyes. The expensive furniture, the artwork, the renovations, all paid for with money that had never belonged to Richard. David, there's something I need to know. Michael's letter mentioned that if anyone contested the will or tried to pressure me, they'd lose their inheritance from the estate. What was Richard supposed to inherit? David smiled grimly. Michael left his father $5,000 and a collection of family photos. The codicil you mentioned stated that if Richard challenged the will or attempted to coerce you in any way, that bequest would be revoked and donated to the veterans of foreign wars. So he gets nothing now? Nothing. His behavior over the last few days has been thoroughly documented. The threats, the attempted fraud with the death benefits, the harassment, it all constitutes a clear violation of the codicil terms. The irony was staggering. In trying to steal everything, Richard had lost even the small amount Michael had intended for him to have. There's something else, David continued. Michael established a trust for any children you might have in the future. If you remarry, if you have kids, they'll be provided for. But the principal assets, the house, the land, the investments, those are yours alone. No future husband can claim them, no one can take them from you. He thought of everything. He loved you very much. And he knew his father better than anyone. We spent another hour going over financial details, investment portfolios, and legal protections I was still struggling to comprehend. When David finally left, he handed me a sealed envelope. One more thing Michael left for you. He asked me to give it to you after everything was settled. I waited until David's car disappeared down the driveway before opening it. Jordan, if you're reading this, it means Dad tried to pull exactly what I thought he'd pull, and you had to fight for what's yours. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to protect you myself. I know you're probably feeling guilty about what happened with Dad. Don't He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. You didn't destroy our family, he did, years ago. Take care of the house. Take care of yourself. Live the life we planned, even if you have to live it alone. And Jordan? Don't you dare feel sorry for him. He's been trying to get his hands on this property since Mom died. He just never expected his son to be smarter than he was. All my love, always, Michael P.S. There's a bottle of champagne hidden behind the winter coats in the hall closet. Mom put it there for a special occasion. I think this qualifies. I found the champagne exactly where he said it would be. A bottle of Dom Perignon with a note in Patricia's handwriting. For the day you finally stand up to the bullies. I opened it and drank a toast to my husband, my mother-in-law, and the quiet strength they'd seen in me before I'd seen it in myself. * 6 months later, I'm still in the house. My house. The house Michael and his mother made sure would always be my sanctuary. I've made changes. Painted the kitchen a soft yellow that makes the morning light dance. Converted Richard's old office into an art studio where I paint landscapes of the property Michael loved so much. Planted a garden where Patricia always said one should go. The legal battles are over. Richard hired a lawyer and tried to contest the will, claiming undue influence and mental incapacity. It lasted exactly 3 weeks before his own attorney advised him to drop it. The documentation was too thorough, the evidence too clear. David told me Richard moved to Florida to live with his sister. I haven't heard from him since the day he left, and I don't expect to. Some bridges, once burned, leave nothing but ash. The house feels different now. Peaceful in a way it never was when Richard lived here. I understand now why Patricia dissolved those trusts, why Michael restructured everything. They weren't just protecting assets, they were protecting the possibility of peace. I've made friends in town. Real friends, not the careful acquaintances I'd maintained when I was constantly walking on eggshells around Richard's opinions and judgments. The librarian invited me to book club. The woman who runs the flower shop taught me about perennials. The veterinarian down the road stops by sometimes to check on the stray cat that's adopted my porch. People see me differently now too. Word got around about what happened, small towns being what they are, and the general consensus seems to be that Richard Morrison finally got what was coming to him. I'm not the soft, naive girl he tried to paint me as. I'm the woman who stood up to the town bully and won. Last week, I got a call from Michael's best friend from high school, someone I'd barely known when we were married. He'd heard about everything and wanted to check on me. Michael always said, "You were tougher than you looked," he told me. Guess he was right. I don't feel tough. Tough people never do. They just do what needs doing. I've been thinking about that conversation a lot. About the difference between being soft and being kind. Between being accommodating and being a doormat. Michael saw that difference in me before I saw it in myself. Yesterday, I found another letter from him, tucked inside a book I'd finally gotten around to reading. This one was shorter. Jordan, if you're reading this, you survived Dad. I knew you would. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. Stronger than you gave yourself credit for. Don't forget that. I won't forget. How could I? Every morning I wake up in the house that Michael and Patricia made sure would always be mine. Every evening I sit on the porch they designed, watching the sunset over the land they protected. Richard thought family was about blue.